I really do treat this like a job. It's something that I'm not getting paid for yet, but I really feel so passionate about it. This book is so special to me because even though I hope no one ever reads this, and it's probably some of my worst writing, it is where I started. Hi, I'm Lily. I'm an aspiring self-published author, and I've been posting on here for a little while, but I wanted to go into like my background of how I've gotten here and what I've been working on. So I have 2 books right now that I'm currently working to publish. One is at the 4th draft and the other one is in the early stages of the 1st draft. I've realized I haven't been talking about the books that I've been writing on this channel, and I wanted to just introduce them and kind of get you that background because I want to start doing more writing vlogs and editing vlogs, and I think it gives more perspective on what I'm actually working on. The first book that I'm working on, the best way I can describe it is it's a fantasy romance book, which is YA. It has forbidden love and a nature-based magic system. It has very like fairy tale, whimsical nature magic vibes, and there is a lot of inspiration from Tangled. The kingdom dance scene in Tangled with that music where she's dancing in the courtyard and has flowers in her hair, that's like one of the big inspiration moments that I had for this story. It was just like a snapshot of seeing that scene and thinking like this scene could make like a whole story. Like this is the vibe, this is the energy that I want to encompass in this story. It's not my first attempt at writing a novel, but it's the first one that I plan on publishing. It's the only novel that I've ever finished a complete draft of. I've gone through so much with this novel because I feel like your first book, you're kind of just learning like how to write a book. So it's going to take a lot more time and it's going to be quite messy and chaotic. So I first started writing on Google Docs and I wrote on there and it was great, but it gets really confusing because you kind of lose your spot every time, and you can have like the sidebar menu, but it's not super helpful. Then I was writing my second draft, and when I went through and edited it and I started writing a second draft, I realized I had to rewrite the entire thing. And during this stage was when I transferred my draft from Google Docs to Scrivener, and that was so overwhelming for me because I am not a very like well-versed person in technology. So that was definitely a struggle, but it's so worth it because I've been using Scrivener and like the different folders and everything to really organize my scenes, because as someone who is kind of like a discovery writer, I tend to jump around and like move things around a lot because I'm discovering the story as I go. In May of 2024, I printed out my second draft, and this was really exciting. If you followed me on any other of my socials like TikTok, you've definitely seen me like talk about this and use it. I printed it out. I literally named it Fantasy Romance Novel because I don't have a working title yet. Now I have kind of like a filler title. It's called like Project Rooted, but it's not really going to be the title, I don't believe. This stage was really fun, like seeing your draft printed in like the full form, even though it was only my second draft and it was really, really messy. It was the most amazing thing because it showed me that like I can print books. Like this is, I mean, I messed up the formatting, like it definitely is not perfect, but it has like its own little like barcode, and it feels like a real book. It feels like thick, like a real book. Just going through and like I edited this, I used a lot of like highlighters and sticky notes. This book was really helpful because when I was teaching myself like how to do everything, I used Save the Cat Writes a Novel. These pink sticky notes right here, I tried to mark where each beat was going to be in the story. The beats itself in the story, they're not going to match up exactly to like the timeline of Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and I think that's okay because every story is going to have like a slightly different timeline and like pacing, but as long as like the main overarching beats and like story structure is there, that's kind of what more matters. So this was a complete rewrite from my first draft. I had so much fun marking it up, but then I realized that I actually had to go back and change it and edit it, and that was like crazy. Like that was actually insane. And that took me a long time. This is where it gets kind of interesting because I went through and edited this, and then I realized that I had to rewrite it again. And I think going back now as a more experienced writer, I don't know if I needed to write like 3 new drafts. Like I think I could have figured out how to work things around, but because I didn't understand how to necessarily revise and rewrite and structure things, I just was like, I'm just going to start from the beginning because it was easier for my brain. So I rewrote this a 3rd time. This is when I started using Scrivener. So I'm going to open it up. I've been calling it fantasy romance novel for a while because For me, it's really hard to name things. I think that's something that holds a lot of weight and I don't want to do it wrong. This is kind of like the draft, but I've been using Scrivener. These are different folders and different documents that you can use to organize different drafts or scenes or chapters. And it was really helpful for me because instead of seeing it as like one big living document, it was smaller documents that were easier to change. I'm not scared to completely like get rid of an old draft because I see it as like practicing writing the story. I really just like get rid of a draft, which is kind of crazy. I figured out how to write scene summaries. And at this point, I started outlining more because I realized like I really did need to outline. I think I'm very against outlining in the very early stages, but I was already at the second or third draft and I was like, I need a plan. I need to figure this out. So what's great about Scrivener is it has these like flashcards where you can like write summaries and like organize your scenes that way. So I made a folder for every chapter and a document for every scene, and I went through and I outlined every single scene and what I wanted to happen, the general idea. So when I was done, I could see the story from like a bird's eye view. And I know a lot of people will outline like this, but seeing it on Scrivener was just so much more helpful. I completely rewrote the draft again. I actually wrote that book like on the road pretty much. During the time, I had my iPad with me, so I was writing as I was going, and I also have Scrivener on my phone. That was really chaotic, and I don't know how I did it, but I finished writing my third draft while I was abroad, I think. Or I came back home and I finished it like soon after. Once I finished my third draft, it felt like the first time that I actually had a full story, that I actually had something that was tangible and that I could like show to people and I wouldn't be embarrassed of. Like it actually made sense. This version, I look at it now and I cringe because I wrote this 6 months ago, and it kind of shows how much you change as a writer and how much you grow in such a short amount of time. I look back at this story and the story has changed so much that I don't even recognize some of the characters. Like their character voice is completely developed or a scene just doesn't even exist anymore. I don't see old drafts as a waste. I see it as like practice, where this book is so special to me because even though I hope no one ever reads this and it's probably some of my worst writing, it is where I started. At this point, I was doing more line level edits, which was really exciting because I got to actually see my story come to life. People always say like the first draft is to make it exist, the second draft is to make it make sense, and then the third draft is to make it entertaining. And I felt like I finally got to the point where I could make it entertaining, and that was so exciting because I just wanted to start to have my vision come to life, where yes, your book can make sense, but when you're reading it, like, are you laughing out loud? Are you smiling? Are you like giggling? Like, are you experiencing what it's like to be the reader? And I would go through each chapter and I would read it through once. I'd take notes, then I would go through line by line and like read it and change it as I go. And there were some scenes that I had to rewrite a lot, but other times I didn't rewrite like anything, and I'd read it out loud at the end. And this is where I went through to kind of polish it up to make sure it made sense and it was ready for feedback. I know some people get feedback on like their draft 1 or draft 2, but for me, like, this book was so messy because it was my first book that it wasn't even like understandable or coherent until my third or fourth draft. So I didn't want to waste precious feedback on a draft that wasn't even going to see the light of day, and it wasn't even going to be similar. Editing the third draft took me a long time. It took me a very long time, much longer than I ever wanted it to. It took me about 3 to 4 months, I think. I underestimated how hard it is to do line level edits because you're going through and you're changing things and you're reworking like dialogue and settings and scenes and so many details that it takes a while because you want to make it really good. Once I had finished editing my third draft, I called it draft 4. And then draft 4 is what I sent to my alpha readers. I've never gotten feedback on my work before, ever. So it was very scary, and I wanted to get my first feedback from my close family members because it was something where I knew they would be honest with me, but they're my family. So like if I made any crazy mistakes or there was any like harsh criticism, I could take it from my family. And I think I also wanted to practice the art of getting feedback. I sent it into a Google Doc and I sent them little Google forums and had them like figure out like what they think, what they feel. Like, I'm kind of testing beta reading. So draft 4 is sitting at 97,760 words. I definitely want to cut that down, I think, because it is YA and it is my debut. So I want to make sure that it's not too wordy, because people don't even know me as an author yet. And I also think there are areas where I can tighten up the pacing and the plot. This version right now that I have, draft 4, is with those alpha readers currently, and they are almost done with feedback, and I'm really excited because I'm going to sit down and talk it out and see that feedback and implement it. And I want to practice like implementing feedback because I haven't gotten feedback yet before, I want to make sure I can do it well. And I was terrified for them to read it for the first time because I was just scared they were going to read it, and not even that they weren't going to like it, just more that they were going to just think I was a bad writer. What's really reassuring is that they do really think it's good writing. And I know that's subjective because it's also my family, they're a bit biased, but it's really nice to hear other people see your work and to talk about it with other people, because it makes it more of like a living, breathing thing. It's not just something that like lives inside your brain. It's like, it's a real thing that you can talk about and like relate about and have their own experiences from. Each reader is going to pick up what resonates with them most out of your story. And it doesn't mean necessarily that that is what's going to resonate with every reader. For example, like one alpha reader might pick up more of the politics because that's something that they're more in tune to and it's something that speaks to them. Or another reader is going to pick up more on the magic system or the nature or the setting because that's something that speaks to their interests. And some people might pick up more on the relationships and the character arcs and the love interests because that's something that relates more to them. And I think everyone's going to find a piece of your story that's going to relate to them the most. And what's really interesting is it's important to have that diverse feedback because everyone's going to resonate with your story differently. And I'm just looking for overall patterns. For example, there are some patterns where some people are saying like this character seems a bit flat, or they seem kind of like they don't really understand that character. And if I have more than one person tell me that, then I will look into that character. And I've been learning a lot about how to not take criticism personally. And I'm actually a lot better at it than I thought I would be, because yes, it is my family, and I think that makes taking criticism easier. I am extremely critical of my own story, so when someone else is critical of my story, I almost see it as respect for the story. If someone read it and they were like, oh, it's really good, I like it, and that's all they say, it would be hard for me to like be like, well, do you understand the story? Did you get it? Like, do you see it for how I see it? And when someone comes to me with like really well drawn out criticism and feedback, I feel like honored because I'm like, you took the time to really look at my story in that lens. Obviously, as long as it's like respectful feedback, but I do see it as like respectful to have criticism. And what's also really exciting is recently I've been getting into developmental editing. I'm taking a developmental editing course, and it's really exciting because I'm learning about developmental editing as I'm editing my first book. So it's such a learning experience for me. And I'm also I'm practicing beta reading for other writer friends, and also I'm editing one of my other writer friends, their book, and I'm just practicing editing. And I think practicing editing other books is helping me understand criticism and feedback on my own book as well. I want to hire a developmental editor, but I also want to make sure that it's the right fit for me. And I've been kind of like hesitant because I think working with a professional editor, it can help your book so much, and I want to find like the right fit for me. I am always working on the second book. I'm always working on the next book because I want to make this a career. I want to be a self-published author. Once people read my first book, I want them to be like, okay, like what's next from this author? So my second book that I'm working on right now it's also a YA fantasy romance, but it's different, where this is a different world with different characters, and this one is based around sirens and pirates. And what's really interesting about this world is that I wanted to switch the FMC and the MMC like usual roles. The FMC is actually a former princess turned pirate. The MMC is a siren warrior. It's kind of like a rivals to lovers, enemies to lovers, but I use enemies to lovers very lightly because I don't know how much I love writing that. In my first book, it's very like forbidden love. It's not forbidden love and slow burn. It's not really like enemies. Like, I don't know if I love that concept, but I think if it's done right and if it's written well, then it can be amazing, you know? So I just don't know if I can write it well, I think. So I think that's kind of more of like my hesitation there, but I'm so interested in my second book because the world, I'm taking inspiration from the city of Atlantis. There's a lot of like mystery, legends, sea magic, like stuff like that. I'm really excited and I'm loving my character so far. So right now, I spent some months brainstorming that book. I did a lot of stuff with like Pinterest and music and like bullet pointing and practicing writing scenes and building my characters, building the world. I know enough where I want to push forward and write my first draft. I've also been reading this book, Story Genius. It's really helpful because especially as I'm in the very early stages of my second book, this has really helped me develop the inner conflict and like the B plot of my story, which is kind of more like the internal plot of the characters and like the big overarching theme and like the lesson they learn and like their misbeliefs and their inner conflict and all that stuff. I kind of have this big plan, and I also plan on developing my skills as a developmental editor because that's something that I'm really interested in and I want to start pursuing that because I really see like this writing and editing thing as like a career. I really do treat this like a job. It's something that I'm not getting paid for yet, but I really feel so passionate about it that like I love doing it despite the money. So it's something that I see so much potential in and I really see a future in. On this channel, I want to start posting a lot more vlogs of me writing and editing and drafting and talking about my whole process because that's the sort of stuff that I really enjoy watching from other writers. But yeah, that was kind of an introduction to me as a writer. Thanks so much for watching and happy writing.